Folks, welcome and thank you for joining us on the fourth episode of the Ideas Project, a limited series by Smallcase. I'm your host, Anupam Gupta, and today we're joined by journalist and entrepreneur Govindraj Ethiraj. Govind has had a storied career as a television and print journalist and has written on Indian business for over 25 years. He's also the founder of FactChecker and of BOOM. He also started India's first data journalism initiative, India Spend. Previously, he was founder, editor-in-chief of Bloomberg TV India, editor of New Media with Business Standard, and in various capacities at CNBC TV 18, The Economic Times, and other leading business magazines. All of this and more makes him the perfect person to talk to about our topic today, succession planning in India. Legacy and family businesses compete on a big scale with their competitors in the long run. What aspects are of crucial importance when thinking of strategies for your family business? Stay tuned. Hey Govind, great to have you here. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for doing this for our listeners.
Thank you so much, Anupam. It's a pleasure to be back with you again after a long time.
Very long time. So let's start going. What exactly is succession planning when we talk about it?
Right. Anupam, I think we are talking about succession planning in the context of enterprises and companies. And succession planning to me would largely mean continuity and ensuring continuity in a deliberate, planned, and anticipatory manner. So it's not something that you suddenly wake up because you've got a heart attack and you say, oh, I've got to make sure that someone else takes over the business because I may not come back very quickly from the hospital, particularly if I'm an older person. It's about saying that how do I ensure continuity? Not because I have to ensure continuity for myself, but most importantly for the stakeholders, which is employees, shareholders, customers, and so on. I mean, any company, whether it's consumer facing or otherwise. So I would say ensuring continuity of ownership, continuity of management, continuity of principles, continuity of values with which the enterprise was first set up, hopefully all being the right ones, is the key way to look at succession planning.
Why is a specific strategy for succession planning important for companies and family businesses, and how does that help?
So if you look at growth of companies, I mean, particularly founder-driven companies, I mean, as we all know, more than 85% of enterprises in India are family run or family owned. And that's roughly the percentage in Asia as well. So Asia as a whole is a family run business phenomenon. Now, as businesses grow and as founders become old, it is important that there is a clear path to management continuity. And that's for two reasons. One is, I think as you get older, you obviously need to spend time, lesser time on the shop floor, so to speak, and maybe more time thinking of strategic direction and strategic way forward and so on. And the next generation, if there is one within the family, needs to start looking at matters more operationally. Succession could also mean that you're really handing over the company to reins that are not in the family. You're handing over to a professional management because you've taken a call that this company needs to, or organization needs to grow. And the family either may not have the right person or may not have the best fit person to run it. But either ways, the continuity of the enterprise for those external stakeholders, I mean, when I say external, I mean in the context of the family, which is really your employees, your customers, your shareholders, and particularly when it comes to shareholders, becomes very, very critical. And that's an area where I think in the past companies or enterprises have not paid much attention to or careful attention to, but increasingly do so now.
Yeah, let's get into that. Yeah, I mean, let's start with examples on both sides. Some examples of succession planning that went right, and what do you think worked well in those cases?
I was looking at the Nifty 50, Anupam. There, in those 50 companies, roughly, I think about 27 or 28 are family run or family owned. Sorry, let me now draw the distinction. Family owned. Of those 28 or so, which are family owned of the Nifty 50, roughly about 11 or 12 are professionally run. Now, what that means is that when I say professionally run is obviously that they are family owned, but professionally run. So again, there could be some nuances there. I mean, you take a company like Asian Paints, the original family is still at chairman level. The managing director of the company or the CEO of the company is an independent professional. You expand that a little bit. You look at companies like Lupin Laboratories, many of the Mahindra and Mahindra companies, for example. Again, most of them are, or Birla companies, Aditya
Right.
Birla Group companies, are all run with professional, independent CEOs at the company level, but managed at the group level by the original founders' family. In the case of individual companies, I think it could be maybe like the Asian Paints example, and I'm quoting examples of stocks or companies which everyone will know
Correct.
or should know. I think the chairman is a family member, but the CEO is a professional. So these are examples where my sense is that the transition has happened or is happening smoothly, and for the right reasons. When I say right reasons, it's quite likely that there was resistance maybe a decade ago or so. It's very likely that some family members wanted an active role in running the company, but some patriarch decided that or the patriarch or the founding patriarch decided that this is not a good idea, and at the least we need to split it up in this fashion. So I would say most nifty 50 companies, Anupam, as I look at it, seem to be running with a combination of family owned, family run, and family owned, professionally run. In the case of family owned and family run, companies like Reliance are obviously the most the examples that really jump out, or Airtel for that matter, family owned but professionally run. You can sense that they are now in the point where that succession call has to be taken. And as an investor, I would watch very carefully to see how they would handle this. And maybe it's a little early to say, because the founding family in Reliance, of course, it's the second generation, is still around and actively managing the affairs of the company. But there are other cases like, let's say, maybe Wipro, where, let's say, again, there has been a transition to the next generation. There was a period of time when it was not clear what the next generation would exactly do or what role they would play. But I think it's clear that next generation is coming at a chairman level. The founder, Azim Premji, has moved on, but the operations of the company are still being run by a professional CEO. In this case, someone who came from Capgemini. So I think it also depends on when you pose this question, Anupam. If you had posed this question, let's say 10 to 15 years ago, at that time, I think there was a lot of, tension within boardrooms, even within families. I think from outside, sometimes these things look as if they've all been handled very smoothly, but they're not. I know of cases, unfortunately, I cannot name them, where, let's say, the second generation wanted to move in much faster into, let's say, the corner office, but was not being allowed to by the founder chairman or the founder patriarch, as the case might be. And there are other cases like, let's say, Gujarat Ambuja, where it's quite clear that there was no succession, and the founders preferred to, sell the company rather than run it for whatever reason, without getting into that. But I think it is very clear that they chose to sell the asset. And there are, again, across industry, maybe not in the Nifty 50 context that we're speaking of, companies where clearly the entire founding family has decided to sell to another player in the same industry or another industry, or to private equity. And we've seen some deals which suggest to me that this could also be a reason.
Yeah, it's a nice big overview and a very detailed look on how the transition has worked on one side. You mentioned about the second, an example of the second generation that probably wanted to come in earlier than what the first generation wanted. Any more examples you can think of succession planning that has gone wrong, and what did work in these cases?
Anupam, it's a little difficult to say. So when you say what's wrong, we clearly have to pull from examples which are perhaps not in the public eye. Because by definition, if these companies are in the Nifty 50 or Sensex 30 or Nifty even 100, that means they've achieved some degree of success, either in the succession or the continuity, whichever way you want to call it. Whereas if they're not there, it's obviously, I guess, by inference, they've not managed to do it. And these are groups. I mean, if you take maybe a group like the Mafatlals, or actually many of the textile companies, and which were in some ways conglomerates in the up to the 90s, I think it's very clear that the transition didn't take place, and it's clear that succession, even if attempted, didn't really work out. Other examples of companies from the north and the east. But I'm a little hesitant to put names, Anupam, because, in some cases, like I said, they are still maybe in the throes of transition. delayed throws. And let me be specific. So let's say the chairman of the company is maybe now in the 70s and the next generation is in their 40s. Maybe the next generation is trying to play an active role, but the founder is not giving up. And because maybe the founder is not confident. Equally, I could argue when I'm looking at it from outside that this is a transition that's not working, or it's a sign of failure. Again, the point about, if you had gone back 10 to 15 years, arguably many of the Tata companies had not really seen through transition from, and when I say transition, I mean JRD Tata to Ratan Tata. And there was a lot of struggle at that time because many companies, and is publicly known, were resisting Ratan Tata's installation as chairman. Now, Tata, as you know, is family and yet not family, because they don't really own shares not like maybe the Birlas or the Ambanis and so on. And there was a problem. But I think, in a way, the Tatas managed to demonstrate and set a better exemplar from Ratan Tata into the next generation, though there was a feeling that it was delayed. But I think Ratan Tata into the next generation, which is now purely professional, in the hands of Chandrasekaran, seems to have now, in retrospect, looked like a much better example of transition. In any case, most Tata Group companies had professional managers, while they themselves may have become, as they were called, satraps, but they were seen as professional managers. I mean, whether you look at Tata Chemicals, Tata Motors, Tata Steel, Indian Hotels, but though the group chairman was part of the family or an extended part of the family. So, yeah, I think some cases where things have worked out well, and some cases where they are working out as we speak, and some cases where they've clearly disappeared. And I think that's really been the biggest, and maybe it's almost like a binary, when you've not done your transition effectively or efficiently, given the fact that there are very strong, powerful external forces of competition, of internationalization, of globalization, all of which may be changing a little bit right now. But if you go to the difficult periods of the late 90s and the 2000s, right up to 2020, that has been a very difficult period, or a tough period. I won't say difficult because it obviously threw up opportunities, but a tough period for Indian industry, particularly the older set of Indian industry. If you look at the age, some of the prominent groups, I mean, Tata's, set up late 19th century, 1868. TVS is 1911. Aditya Birla is again more than 100 years old. Kirloskar Group, more than 100 years old. Godrej, more than 100 years old. Shapoorji Pallonji, more than 100 years old. Reliance, 1966. So that's more than 50 years old. So all of these people are still around in various degrees of strength. Maybe someone like Kirloskar has fragmented a little bit, a lot of family battles and ownership battles, but they're still there. So that, to me, in a way, is a sign that transitions, again, in retrospect, have been and successions have been handled well. Godrej, as you know, is in the middle of a succession right now. Godrej and Boyce, as is Godrej Soaps has happened a little earlier, with Adri Godrej handing over to his next generation. In the case of Godrej and Boyce, I think it's clearly a handover to a niece of the family, not an immediate child. So clearly, it's a different, let's say, approach or structure that they're following, and not only saying that my daughter or son will inherit the mantle as it happens.
Yeah. Let's talk about what you said about family owned and family run, right? Because what you're saying is the difference between family management by, say, a family person versus professional management and family ownership. So there are two very distinct set of ways of running a company. How have these two models fared in India traditionally?
So I think, Anupam, the trend of family owned and professionally run is a relatively new one. When I say relatively new, I mean maybe a decade or two, as opposed to, let's say, family owned, family run, which has been obviously there for a long time. It's a little difficult to say whether either model has worked better or worked worse, because I think the smart companies, again, the kind that we are talking about today, have either acknowledged what their weaknesses are at an early point, which is really, let's say, early 2000s, and then taken a decision on whether to hand over to a professional, or, like I said, they may have even got out of the business, or ensured that their successor is suitably trained, either on the shop floor, or, let's say, gone overseas, got a management degree, spent some time in an international neutral environment, and then come back. So there is nothing to say that one works better than the other, at least going by this example set that I'm talking about. So if you take banking, so you have a Kotak Bank which is run by Uday Kotak, and you have an ICICI and you have an HDFC Bank. So as you know, HDFC is not clearly professional. There is no family, or never was perhaps, even to start with. ICICI spun off, run by almost owner professionals in the first round, but then now purely professional. Kotak, run by Uday Kotak, clearly owner and a manager. Anupam, I'm not able to clearly say. I mean, now there are others who've studied this very deeply, so maybe they will, with far more data, will be able to come at it. But intuitively, there is nothing to say at this point that either set, whether it's professionals or owner managers, are doing any better or worse than the other one. I mean, I'm speaking intuitively, looking at the list of maybe a list of 50 to 100 companies that I have in my hand.
Sure. Makes sense. So, from an investor's point of view, Govind, how important is succession planning?
It's obviously very important. I think, among other things, it tells you, let's say, if there is a founder, what does the founder think of the money that he or she took from me as an investor, maybe 30 or 40 years ago, right? Or today, if I've bought into that company recently. When I invest in you, I mean, I may be a short-term day trader, but in general, let's assume that most people who invest, suppose Anupam sets up a company, and or Anupam is running his father's company, and I invested when your father was still actively running it, but today you are. And I expect that you will protect my investment in the sense that you will give me returns over time, not just right now, but let's say for me and my future generations. And if you look at a lot of investor folklore, that's really what it talks about, right? I mean, I invested in Infosys and I got my daughter married off, is something that you might hear quite often. I invested in Dhirubhai Ambani and Reliance, and today I have a house. I managed to set up my own business and do things. Again, you might hear that in the context of Birla. So maybe it's a little more Asian and Indian, but there is definitely a sense that, if I've invested in a company, I've invested for the real long term. That's the mindset I'm coming in with, then you need to respond similarly. And therefore, think of me as your long-term partner, stakeholder, and someone whose interests you have to protect by ensuring that there is the company continues to grow even after, let's say, I'm maybe getting older and therefore not in as much control as I once was, or having the same level of energy that I once had, by handing over to a person who's of equal, if not greater competence, ideally. And I say greater ideally. And whether that's a professional or someone who's from within the family, that of course depends.
Yeah. So last two questions now, Govind, kind of linked to each other. What are some signs or indications that give you an idea of succession planning within a company?
I mean, today I think you have to go by what people are saying outside, right? This can be both the right and the wrong examples. I mean, sometimes you see people, where clearly the family member has taken a role in the company and seems to be saying all the wrong things, or clearly being given a part of the business which is not so core or doesn't look like it's core. And I would draw a conclusion that, maybe there is something wrong in the succession, or there is some concern about the nature of succession. And maybe we need to be careful about how things pan out. I mean, there's nothing you can do but except to watch. If you look at Reliance, since that's what many people look at, I mean, you can see some of the announcements that have been coming vis-a-vis the children who have over the last 5-6 years been given roles in managing it. And there's a lot of stuff that you hear outside as well. Okay, one part of the family is going to look after retail, one part of the family is going to look after telecom, and so on. And yet, of course, Reliance has a management structure which may be a little different from others. And, there is a ring of very, very seasoned professionals. Now, how that is going to run once, let's say, Mukesh Ambani takes a back seat, as and when at some point he has to, we don't know. But at this point, it seems to be working fine. But the signals are important because these are really the new generation businesses which are, going to keep the stock price going for the next 10 years. In other cases, maybe you can see that the second generation has not come in. I mean, if you follow it very closely, I think it becomes evident that the second generation or the next generation has not come into the company as you may have expected or thought. But there are clearly companies where the second generation has not come in.
Yeah.
or maybe the founders decided that the talent outside is far superior and will take the company to greater heights, and therefore let's bet on that, rather than being, let's say, stubborn about having a family member replace me. So I mean, by inference you can say that if maybe 10 or 11 of those 28 companies of the Nifty 50 are professionally run but family owned, it's evident that they've decided that not to hand it over to family members, including all the Asian Paints examples that I gave you.
Yeah. So let's wrap up this with a real life example, or maybe just talk about one or two of these companies. Maybe if you don't want to name them, that's fine. To help our listeners understand what a succession plan looks like.
Let me maybe focus on the mechanics. I think one is, let's say, how old is the founder of the company? So let's say if the founder is into the 60s, they should surely be announcing some kind of succession plan, right? I mean, before that, I would not expect it to be or necessary that it should be in public domain. But maybe once you're into your 60s, you should be surely announcing it in some way. You should be indicating what the next, what's coming up. Is it going to be a family member? Is it not going to be a family member? If it's a family member, by then I'm assuming most likely that family member is already working in the company with some role and demonstrating his or her capability, as has happened in many cases. I think as the founder gets a little older, I think it's time to get into specifics and tell shareholders, one, what is the direction the company is going to take. Because you may decide that without me, the company needs to go in a totally different direction. I need to split the business into two parts and give it to two. Like, take Bajaj Auto. Much earlier, clearly, Rahul Bajaj decided that one is, of course, he had two sons who were capable. But he also decided that strategically, Bajaj needs to separate its finance business from its two-wheeler business. And then subsequently, the finance went to Sanjeev Bajaj and it became Bajaj Finance. And Rajiv Bajaj went and started running Bajaj Auto. So again, when you look at it, I think it's clear that it's a good case of smart succession, smart early planning, and maybe also in some ways, ensuring that the business stays within the family. So now, did they search for professionals as potential substitutes for the two sons? I don't know. But it turns out that I think maybe I would think most shareholders would agree that the sons have done a good job or a reasonable job of rewarding shareholders or maintaining continuity and so on. And plus, of course, maybe benefiting from more shares in their hand from the spun-off companies. So, yeah, I guess that's an example, Anupam, of where things seem to have gone smoothly. But I think in the case of Reliance, at some point Adani's and so on, these are questions that have to be posed as shareholders, and then you should see how transparently the existing management responds and then initiates the process.
Folks, there you go. That's what a succession plan looks like. And with that, that's a wrap on this episode of the Ideas Project. Hope you enjoyed this chat with Govind, and hope this helps you get a better understanding of how to go about with succession planning, the kinds of investment opportunities it can give rise to, and how secure these family businesses are as assets. Govind, thank you. Really, thank you so much for joining us and giving your insights on this episode of the Ideas Project.
Thank you so much, Anupam. It's been a pleasure talking to you as always, and hope to meet soon.
And folks, if you like this episode, do consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. This podcast is powered by Smallcase. We will come back with more insightful conversations to help you achieve a well-rounded investment portfolio. Until then, bye-bye. See you